This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
A stark warning on global warming. A UN report blames humanity for the devastating effects of climate change. Sudan recalls its ambassador to Ethiopia after Addis turned down its offer to mediate the Tigray conflict. And the Taliban seize 3 more provincial capitals in Afghanistan as the government vows to retake key installations. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Nigerians lament the rising cost of cooking gas. And in sports, Morocco's Al Bakkali returns home to a hero's welcome after his steeplechase triumph. In our top story this hour, UN researchers have just released an alarming report on the climate crisis. The report was published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It puts the blame for the current climate crisis on human activities. Hundreds of the world's top scientists contributed to the report. They warned that humans have caused unprecedented and irreversible change to the climate. Over the next 2 decades, the world will also hit the 1.5 degree Celsius danger limit. That's according to the report. The report is the first major review of the science of climate change since 2013. Well, let's bring you more on this now. I'm joined by Julia Lyubova in Geneva for more on that report. Thanks for joining us, Julia. Of course, from floods to wildfires and droughts, the UN is saying that the world is facing an unprecedented climate crisis. Just talk us through some of the key highlights of this report.
Well, certainly, this report is a landmark report by UN scientists from around the world, and it has been dubbed as Code Red for Humanity. The report says that the humanity impact on climate is damaging, and that is a statement of fact. Some key observations and key findings from this report, for example, is that in the past 5 years have been the hottest on record since 1850, and that human influence is very likely the cause of glacier retreat since the 1990s and the decrease of the Arctic sea ice. The global surface temperatures was 1.9 degrees Celsius higher in the past decades than since between 1850 and 1900, and the sea level rise rate has tripled compared with the last century. And recent heat waves and extreme temperatures were more frequent and intense since 1950. So the list goes on of all the damages that has been done. But the bottom line is that the human influence has warmed the temperatures, oceans and land.
And Julia, very stark findings there indeed, and of course blaming that crisis on humanity. What's particularly concerning is the use of the word irreversible change that's been caused by humans. Tell us what the scientists are saying about the extent to which this damage can be undone, and if so, how?
Well, indeed, so scientists in this report are saying that for many of these consequences, there is no turning back. But at the same time, they say that there is hope that deep cuts in greenhouse emissions, they could stabilize rising temperatures. Well, this report is called the Summary for Policymakers, and it's aimed at governments to take urgent action to reverse this. For example, the United Nations chief, Antonio Guterres, he said that if we combine forces now, we can avert climate catastrophe. However, he also stressed at the same time that there is no time for delay and no room for excuses.
Yeah, the time for action is now. Tell us more about what the biggest culprits of global warming can do right now to make things right.
Well, certainly, this report comes just a few months before a major summit called the COP26. And the UN says that it is crucial. The key is for world leaders to make sure that the COP26 summit is a success. It is a major climate summit which is due to take place in Glasgow. in November later this year. And for this summit, leaders from 196 countries will gather together, and they will try to agree action to limit climate change. So this summit is seen as crucial to avert those damages, and certainly leaders will be set ambitious targets to ensure that greenhouse emissions are reduced. And some of those targets include net zero by 2050. So indeed, we'll have to wait for that summit in Glasgow in November later this year to see what actions governments agree to take and exactly what can be done to avert those damages.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to Julia Lyubova joining us there from Geneva. Well, indeed, extreme weather events are taking place around the world. In California, wildfires continue to rage. The Dixie Fire has burned nearly 1,900 square kilometers in the western U.S. state and destroyed more than 400 residential and commercial buildings. Firefighters are struggling with dry conditions. Further north, Canada is also battling wildfires. Edith Tianzin has more.
The largest wildfire currently raging in the United States is expanding. Containment of the Dixie Fire in Northern California has dropped from 35% to only about 21%. 4 firefighters were injured when a tree branch fell on them during their night shift. They're reported in stable condition. Greenville, a town of about 1,000 people, was wiped out. It looks like a bomb went off. There's nothing left, said one of the residents. Authorities are assessing the damage in the area. Some residents are still unaccounted for. The Dixie Fire has so far destroyed at least 400 structures and continues to trigger more evacuations. A federal judge last Friday gave Pacific Gas and Electric, California's largest power company, 1 week to explain its role in potentially starting 2 fires that eventually merged. The utility said last month that a fuse blown from its power lines may have started the Dixie Fire. This comes after the company's equipment was found responsible for the 2018 Camp Fire, which killed 85 people and destroyed the town of Paradise. Across the border, Canada is also facing catastrophic fires. Nearly 30,000 square kilometers of Canadian wildlands have burnt this year, more than twice the 20-year average for this time of the year. And it's more than twice the area that has burnt in the United States so far this year. Environmentalists have long warned about Canada's increasingly drier forests posing a high risk for fires, but most did not anticipate a fire season this explosive, starting from British Columbia and the Yukon in the west, all the way to Manitoba and Ontario in the east. Aside from ravaged towns and unhealthy air quality, the fires have long-term implications on the environment, as many of these forests used to have a high capacity to capture greenhouse gases and provide breeding grounds for migratory birds. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Well, Greece is also experiencing devastating wildfires. While the capital, Athens, is out of danger, strong winds continue to spread fires on the large central island of Evia. Towns and villages have been evacuated. Evangelo Sipsas reports.
The fires here north of Athens are now under control, allowing authorities and volunteers to set up mobile centers for people to get basic necessities such as water, food, and clothes. But in Evia, Greece's second largest island, the fires continue to rampage, threatening homes and triggering more evacuations. 3 main wildfires continue to burn across the country, with the one on Evia threatening whole towns. It has forced hundreds of residents to flee on ferries after the blaze cut off all means of escape. The destruction is imminent, with the entire north part of the island now almost completely destroyed. Villages and towns continue to be evacuated as the fire front rages from the west coast to the east. Many fleeing the apocalyptic scene cannot hold their anger back, accusing authorities of not acting fast enough.
The disaster, you can see it, right? It's huge. Our villages are destroyed. There is nothing left from our homes, our properties, nothing. And we were all alone. 3 days now, we're all alone. Nobody helped, no one. People need help. They lost their homes, they lost their jobs. They need help. The government has huge responsibilities. All the governments.
As fires north of Athens come under control, the Greek capital is facing a health hazard. With choking smoke sitting across the city, authorities have told people to avoid unnecessary travel, keep windows shut, and to wear masks. A hotline has been set up for people with breathing problems. Greece is now receiving help from several European countries, but Deputy Civil Protection Minister Nikos Kardalias says the situation remains extremely difficult.
In a titanic effort through the night and during today, people fighting on several fronts have managed to contain the fire in Attica. We are continuing to fight the big battles on Evia, in Ilia and in other areas.
In the last 24 hours, the fire brigade had some success tackling 60 wildfires. But this is far from over, as the latest scenes from the island of Evia show. Evangelos Ipsas for CGTN, Athens, Greece.
Meanwhile, thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes in southwest China due to heavy rain and flooding. Half a dozen cities in Sichuan province have experienced flash floods over the past 2 days. Daju County was one of the worst hit areas. Rescue teams are working to help those who are trapped. Weather authorities say more rain is expected over the coming days. Well, turning our attention to some of the news now, Sudan has recalled its ambassador to neighboring Ethiopia. This is the latest move in the standoff between the two nations, sparked by Ethiopia's refusal to let Sudan mediate in the ongoing conflict in Tigray. According to the UN Refugee Agency, some 60,000 refugees have poured into Sudan since late 2020, when fighting began in Ethiopia's Tigray region. According to a statement by Sudan's foreign ministry, the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok's offer to step in as a mediator came within the framework of his presidency of the regional body IGAD. For more on this story, let's now cross to CGTN's Girum Chala, standing by for us in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Thank you so much for joining us, Girum. Just tell us more about this decision to recall the ambassador, and has the Ethiopian government responded at all to this decision?
Lindy, first of all, there is no official communication about the recall by Sudan of its ambassador here in Addis Ababa. But the situation, the border conflict between Ethiopia and Sudan is something serious and deserves serious international attention. The Ethiopian government says that Sudan has taken advantage of the internal conflict in Ethiopia to invade some of the lands which belong to the country. Sudan, on the other hand, is claiming that this land historically has been belonging to us, and Ethiopia is disregarding some of the facts on paper. All in all, in general terms, the recall of the Sudanese ambassador from Addis Ababa to Khartoum, and also the rejection of the Ethiopian government of the mediation efforts proposal by Sudan, shows that the situation is escalating and needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So far what we know is the government does not say anything about the recall, but then again, the tension can be seen that it is really getting stronger by the day.
And of course, all of this against the backdrop of an ongoing humanitarian crisis in the Tigray region. Girum, pressure has been mounting on both the Ethiopian government and the TPLF to allow aid into Tigray. What is the situation now?
Lindy, first, positive news. In the Tigray regional state, millions of people are known to be affected by the war, and they are in need of humanitarian assistance, basic assistance, including food. And now the UN is reporting that trucks are now crossing the border from the Afar region side to the Tigray regional state. 150 plus of them have crossed. Another 40 plus trucks filled with humanitarian assistance have also crossed. And now there are also more expected to cross the border. So the situation slowly seems to be improving, but remains to be dire. Lindy, you have to understand that these millions of people affected need continuous humanitarian assistance. The government is saying that it is TPLF, it's still preventing this assistance to be smooth because of the continued attacks that it is launching against the Afar and Amhara regional states, although the government has declared a unilateral humanitarian ceasefire. TPLF is blaming the government of not allowing humanitarian assistance to be delivered. So although things are improving slowly, there needs to be a job to be done. And one of them, and this is according to the UN, is to stop the war and continue peaceful negotiations, Lindy.
Well, thank you so much, Girum Chala, joining us there live from Addis Ababa. Well, staying in Ethiopia, pro-government protesters on Sunday gathered at Meskel Square in the capital, Addis Ababa. The protesters slammed TPLF rebel forces in the Tigray region and denounced alleged external interference in the nation's politics. CGTN's Daniel Arab-Moy brings us more.
Thousands of Ethiopians are rallying in the streets in support of government forces and in protest against the TPLF. Conflict erupted in Tigray in November last year between the government and the region's former ruling party.
The TPLF is making great efforts both inside and outside of Ethiopia to destroy our country. To destroy Ethiopia by collaborating with countries that are Ethiopia's enemies, a stateless government, and are trying to create a puppet government like any other country. And this is completely unacceptable.
In the first place, I want to stand with our Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to show support and solidarity. There are many development projects that have been started and Allah has made them successful. On the other hand, I'm willing to go and fight with juntas.
The United Nations has been pushing to ensure more aid reaches Tigray after saying that over 400,000 people are facing famine conditions in the region. Officials have called on the international community to respect the interest of the Ethiopian people.
On Ethiopian soil, no puppet government will be established. Ethiopians have chosen a leader who prioritizes Ethiopianness, ensures Ethiopia's development. A government that will elevate Africa and make Ethiopia a model will be formed in early September.
In June, the Ethiopian government declared a unilateral ceasefire, which was rejected by the TPLF. The conflict has now extended to the surrounding regions of Amhara and Afar. Daniel Arab-Moy, CGTN.
Rwandan and Mozambican troops deployed to Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province are reporting that they have recaptured control of the insurgent stronghold of Mushimbo de Praia. Security forces say the recovery of the town marks the end of the first phase of the counter-insurgency operations in Mozambique. The port town has been a major stronghold for insurgents linked to Islamic State and was from there where their first attacks were staged in 2017. Rwanda sent in 1,000 soldiers last month to fight alongside Mozambican forces. The 16-member Southern African Development Community, or SADC, has also deployed troops. Almost 800,000 people have been displaced in Cabo Delgado since fighting began. At least 12 soldiers have been killed in Burkina Faso, according to several security sources. Speaking to Reuters, the 3 security sources added 7 soldiers were also missing. The attack allegedly took place on Sunday in the Boucle de Mohon region, located in the northwest of Burkina Faso. The army has yet to release an official statement regarding the assault. Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, the Taliban seized 3 more provincial capitals in Afghanistan as the government vows to retake key installations. And China and Russia begin joint military drills. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. In international news, the Taliban have taken 3 more provincial capitals in Afghanistan as they continue a bid for control of the country. Kunduz, Saripul and Taloqan in the north fell within hours of each other yesterday. Zaranj and Shaburhan fell much earlier. In all, 5 provincial capitals have been captured in 3 days. Kunduz is the most significant Taliban gain as it lies at the gateway to mineral-rich northern provinces and Central Asia. The government says it's fighting to retake key installations as the Taliban warn against a U.S. intervention. Sultan Faizi has more from Kabul.
This morning I saw a statement from the Taliban claiming that they have surrounded the city of Pulakhumri, which is the provincial capital of Baghlan, and that is in the south part of Kunduz province. Fall of Kunduz actually means a lot for the northern region. It affects all neighboring provinces as the Taliban already captured many districts in those areas. Now the strategy is to enter those cities, fighting the Afghan forces, releasing the prisoners at the first hand, and then to fight the Afghan forces up to pushing them to the military bases that are in the outskirts of those cities. So in Takhar province, the Afghan forces and also Afghan officials evacuated the city without any fighting, so that it led the Taliban to release all the prisoners. So the prisoners are also, however, they are lower level commanders of the Taliban and they are fighters in those prisons. But again, it could help more reinforcement for the Taliban. Now we have been seeing a lot of civilians protesting against the government here in Kabul, saying that the government is not doing enough to retaliate and to take back those provincial capitals. The question is, besides the air support by the U.S. forces, will the Afghan government be capable of taking back those provincial capitals or not? So this question will be answered once the government takes any steps, because they have been saying that the government has a security plan to retake these provinces.
Joint military drills between China and Russia have begun in Qingtongxia in northwest China's Ningxia Autonomous Region. Zheng Yubing has more.
We're now at the People's Liberation Army's Combat Arms Tactical Training Base in Qingtongxia. A review was held here at 10 o'clock in the morning with both militaries in 13 formations marching across the drill ground for inspection. Various types of combat aircraft flew overhead in 2 formations, and a variety of artillery and armored equipment is on display in the distance. And this is the 4th consecutive year for both militaries to hold drills of this kind. And it's the first joint drill held in China since the first COVID-19 outbreak in 2020. Both countries say the drills are meant to further demonstrate the 2 sides' resolve and capability, as well as their ability to fight terrorist forces and jointly safeguard regional peace and security. Lieutenant General Liu Xiaowu, Deputy Commander of the PLA Western Theater Command, said the exercise represents the new high level of China-Russia comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination. Roughly 10,000 Chinese and Russian troops are participating in the event. From today until August 13th, they will be mixed into teams and carry out training together. The drill will verify and improve both troops' capabilities in areas like joint reconnaissance and joint attacks and elimination. Zheng Yubing, CGTN, Qingtongxia.
Yubing also spoke to members of an armored assault team from China.
Rapid assaults, armored vehicles, and fierce firefights is all part of the training for these troops at this joint military exercise involving Chinese and Russian land forces.
Well, the soldiers are making their preparation and they're getting their combat vehicles in position to prepare for the upcoming exercises.
This new type of wheeled armored assault vehicle is getting a lot of attention at the drill site.
With tank guns, anti-aircraft machine guns, and various types of ammunition, it has a really powerful striking capability.
In a sign of cooperation, Russian troops at this exercise are learning how to drive Chinese armored vehicles.
To help the Russian teams quickly adapt to this new equipment, we did a lot of preparation, including learning plans and training aids.
As old friends participating in the International Army Games, both sides will closely coordinate in a drill and use dozens of weapons in potential combat scenarios.
This is a way to test the combined combat capabilities. The firepower of this drill has high intensity, as there could be more than 100 guns fired in a minute at the same time in the same place.
They hope the joint exercise will enhance the China-Russian alliance and combat capabilities for their two militaries. Zheng Yibing, CGTN, Qingtongxia.
Turning to Tunisia now, the country is looking to speed up its COVID-19 vaccination drive. The government has opened vaccinations to people over 40 and has set a target of vaccinating over half the population by October. As part of this effort, over 300 vaccination centers held an open day for people on a walk-in basis. The health ministry says over 500,000 received vaccinations on Sunday. Tunisia has recorded more than 20,000 deaths since the start of the coronavirus pandemic.
The vaccinations will continue in the coming days until all the Tunisian people are vaccinated. We will continue the vaccination against all pandemics and a further vaccination against political pandemics, as well as political microbes.
Chinese health authorities continue to battle a growing coronavirus outbreak. 94 new infections have been reported. The majority are in two provinces. Henan reported 41 new cases, while Jiangsu announced 38, all in the same city, Yangzhou. Hunan saw a dozen new cases and Hubei 3. China has over 1,600 active cases now. Some of the regional outbreaks have been traced to the airport in Jiangsu's capital city, Nanjing, where several workers became infected last month. Henan's outbreak was traced to a hospital treating coronavirus patients in the city of Zhangzhou. Well, COVID-19 cases are also surging across the U.S., where daily increases average 100,000 new cases. The country has so far reported over 35 million cases and more than 610,000 deaths. Hospitalizations have also topped the 66,000 mark, which is the highest since February. The state of Florida has set a record in the number of new cases for the 5th day in a row, with nearly 24,000 infections. And more children are getting infected, making up now 20% of all new cases across the country. Children under 12 years old are still ineligible for vaccination. Some states are requiring students to wear masks, and some have reinstated indoor mask mandates for the general public. Well, let's take a short break now. Your business news up next. Coming up, Nigerians lament the rising cost of cooking gas.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
In your business news, the price of liquefied petroleum gas, also known as cooking gas, has gone up significantly in several African countries. Kenya and Nigeria recently effected price increases for cooking gas, a move that may force users to turn to alternatives such as charcoal, kerosene and firewood amid high unemployment and poverty rates in the countries. Both gas sellers and users in Nigeria are struggling. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
It's the peak period of sales at this gas plant, but there are no customers. The manager of the gas plant says sales has dropped drastically since the price of gas in the country was suddenly jacked up 3 weeks ago.
Presently, the price of gas is 454 naira per kg. So when you want to buy 12.5 kg now, that's about 5,700 approximately, and that's on the high side because the complaints, the feedback we are getting from customers is not something to be happy about. But then what do? I use gas at home too, so I know how it feels. It hurts, my pocket hurts, So if my pocket should hurt, that of the customer too will also hurt.
Some customers like petty trader Oluwatosin Akinremi are still managing to put up with the hike in price, but she says she has had to make some drastic adjustments.
I was using 12.5. I couldn't, because I cannot afford the price, so I have to go and buy this half of it, 6 kg. Now 6 kg is 3,000. So the thing is really affecting me, and there's no how you can do without cooking.
Restaurant owner Yu Ugoya is still using gas for her cooking, but she says she's already planning to switch over to charcoal.
Let me try charcoal for 1 week. If I buy 1 bag of charcoal, then I will now compare it with gas. And I believe charcoal is even better now, not even need of daily. The gas is going up every day.
Some other local restaurant owners have since abandoned gas for firewood and not making any plans to make a U-turn.
The smoking disturbs me.
This smoke disturbs me a lot. It affects my eyes and my lungs. It also disturbs my neighbor. Sometimes they complain about the smoke, but I usually plead for their patience. I just cannot help it.
Apart from the issues of climate change, medical experts say the use of firewood also poses serious health hazard. And with the increasing price of gas, more people like Abba are likely to turn to firewood.
We do know, for example, that when you incinerate firewood and you burn it and use it as a cooking fuel, you tend to produce over 200 different chemicals. Prominent, of course, is carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, and a couple of other chemicals. The issues with these chemicals is that they are almost as pungent and as dangerous to health as the usual cigarette smoke we talk about.
Nigeria consumes an estimated 1 million metric tons of cooking gas annually. Even though the country is a major gas producer, it still imports about 65% of what it consumes, as local production of cooking gas is still very low. High cost of foreign exchange as a result of devaluation is mainly responsible for the hike in the price of gas. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Egypt's parliament has approved a new law that aims to improve the management of its water resources and achieve equitable distribution for its citizens. The law was adopted after 4 years of negotiations and will enable Egypt to maximize the use of its limited water resources. From Cairo, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with more.
The original water resources law was adopted back in 1984. Since then, Egypt's population jumped from 40 million to over 100 million in 2021, pushing Egypt into the water poverty level. The House of Representatives passed the new Water Resources and Irrigation Act that authorities say will protect its water resources, the waterway network, installations, equipment, and irrigation and drainage properties.
This law is important because it's making the people partners with the state in managing the water resources in the agricultural sector. Reducing the license fees for cultivating desert land from 50,000 to 10,000 Egyptian pounds is very good because there has been a lot of construction and building of houses on cultivated land in the valley, which cut down on green areas. So we are encouraging people to conquer the desert by reducing their cost and using water wells instead.
Over 95% of Egypt's water resources come from the River Nile. Egypt's annual fixed water share of 55 billion cubic meters is being eaten up by the growing population, as well as the possible risks from climate change and Ethiopia's Renaissance Dam. As it faces these challenges, the North African country has been working on additional water resources.
The procedures taken by the government to create more water resources are very important. It has established more than 5 large water desalination projects in different cities. There are also steps to extract and preserve underground water. We are changing the irrigation system using technology to conserve water and to cultivate larger areas and more crops with the same amount of water. It's an expensive technology, but it's inevitable, and we are trying to localize it.
That's along with several water recycling plants around the country. The government is also pushing farmers to cut down on high water-consuming crops, such as rice. The Water Resources Act is not only about agriculture and irrigation. It requires citizens' input in the system in order to ensure a quality and successful water preservation. The state is adopting stricter punishments on companies and civilians who waste water. There are also extensive public awareness campaigns to teach Egyptians water preservation, hoping this would push water consumption down. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The illegal poaching of rhino horn in South Africa is on the rise again. There was a marked decrease during the hard lockdown to curb the spread of COVID-19. But since restrictions have eased, poachers are now back on the hunt for horns, as CGTN's Sumitra Naidu reports.
South Africa's hard lockdown at the end of March last year brought the country to a near standstill. All movement was banned except for essential services. While this was devastating to the economy, it was a relief for rhino conservation.
During the first hard lockdown that we had as a country, we didn't experience any poaching incidents for close to about 3 months. And that was due to the fact that there was no movement of goods out of South Africa. There was no movement of people as well. It was very restricted. And in the park, we only had essential workers. It was easier to spot anybody in the bush if they didn't belong there.
Despite the reduction, there were still a few casualties, and with international travel slowly opening up, authorities are noticing a lot more activity on the ground.
In the first 6 months of 2021, there has been an increase in rhino poaching compared to the first 6 months of last year, where only 166 rhino were poached. In the first 6 months of this year, we have very sadly lost 249 animals. This is less than the 318 that we lost in the same period in 2019.
More measures are being put in place to curb the poaching. Safely dehorning rhinos has also helped to prevent rhino killings.
What we have done also is to call in the South African National Defence Force. The border area is their competence. They are the ones who have to keep that safe from intruders and from incursions. But unfortunately, it is such a wide area and people do manage to come through.
South African authorities are doing all they can to stop the rhino poaching, but poachers often find new ways of getting in.
In the first 6 months of this year, Kruger Park has experienced 715 poacher incursions, an increase of approximately 4% compared to last year. The total number of rhino that we have lost in the Kruger Park in the first 6 months of this year is 132.
The COVID restrictions and the limitations on the movement of people helped to save hundreds of rhinos. Unfortunately, a lot more needs to be done in order to keep this species from going extinct, especially now that international borders are reopening. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, South Africa.
Zimbabwe's annual inflation has receded to the double-digit territory for the first time in 2 years. Inflation figures for July were 56.37%. That's compared to 106.6% in June. CGTN's Rhino has the details from Harare.
From a peak of 837.5% in July 2020, Zimbabwe's inflation has been on a steady descent, dropping to 56.37% in July this year. Authorities claim the slowdown is due to fiscal reforms, but some believe the figures are not a true reflection of reality due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
That downward pressure on inflation is just because business is slow. There's no business at the moment. So what we have is a reflection of yesterday's prices, because we are still looking at yesterday's stocks, where still there's not enough consumption for even businesses, and some are not even in operation at the moment.
The statistics also do not take into account the structure of the economy.
76% of employment is now informal. The informal economy is contributing 62% to GDP. So a lot of the developments that are taking place in the informal economy are hidden from these official numbers.
That's why some here believe the country is not out of the woods just yet, as it faces several downside risks. Among them, increased wage demands from public servants, a foreign currency black market, and growing government debt. All these mean there's more to do, especially if citizens are to start feeling the difference.
We may reach 30%, 40%, 50% by year end, but again, it's neither here nor there, because already we are saying prices in Zimbabwe are on the very high side, and as long as they are on the very high side, it means competitiveness is affected, productivity is affected, and return on investment is affected, and that affects our investment outlook. So yes, we are celebrating this slowdown. It's good. We need to maintain the momentum, but I think there's still a lot of challenges that we need to grapple with. We need to continue with monetary prudence. We need to institute more institutional reforms around parastatals because government still continues to subsidize. We need, I think, to also manage our debt levels.
Zimbabwe Central Bank has forecast annual inflation to slow down to 25% by year end. Firearms, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The Mexican government has taken aim at U.S. gun manufacturers, blaming them for much of the bloodshed south of the border. Alistair Bavistock explains.
Mexico's suit was filed in a U.S. federal court in Boston, Massachusetts, against 11 major U.S. firearms manufacturers, citing negligent business practices leading to more than 500,000 guns a year being smuggled into Mexico.
We seek that the companies in the lawsuit provide compensation to Mexico for the damages caused by their negligent practices. We trust in the judicial standard that will litigate and win over the judge. And we are going to reduce illicit trafficking to those who promote trafficking in the United States.
That compensation sought amounts to at least $10 billion, according to Mexican officials. They estimate 70% of weapons trafficked to Mexico come from the US and are linked to 15,000 or more murders a year. While Mexico permits its citizens to legally own firearms, the process for obtaining one is long and arduous. Concealed carry permits are almost impossible to obtain, and the only gun store in the entire country is run by the Mexican military. However, the Mexican government has a tough case to build, according to José Francisco de Villa, a Mexican lawyer who has studied the issue.
As the litigant, Mexico has the burden of proof, and it will not be enough to cite government statistics or journalistic reports. Scientific proof for each of their arguments, which is very difficult to obtain, will be vital. Without those, Mexico will not have a case.
The US National Shooting Sports Foundation, an industry trade association, responded, calling the allegations baseless and stating that the Mexican government is responsible for the rampant crime and corruption within their own borders. That's something that Brian LeBaron, whose family members were murdered in Chihuahua State in 2019, agrees with.
It has been proven from bullet casing analysis that shots were fired by US-made firearms.
But I can't blame the guns. I blame the people who pulled the triggers and the situation in Mexico that allows a sicario to kill without thinking, because 98% of murders go unsolved and unpunished in this country.
In a case that could last for many years, Mexico says it hopes to influence US firearms policy. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
Villages across China have received government funding since 2015 under a program to eradicate absolute poverty. Last year, China declared victory in the fight, lifting nearly 100 million people out of poverty. Well, CGTN visited a beneficiary of the government program in Yunnan province to find out how they feel about the changes.
At first, Li Jun was unsure about letting me see her house. She seemed especially embarrassed to show me her old house.
The rain would always come inside and we didn't have beds or anything. We were 5 people living together. We didn't have a kitchen. We didn't have anything.
The wooden house sits in stark contrast to her current home, made of concrete and tiles with glass in the windows. When it rains, she says it doesn't leak anymore, and there's even a kitchen. Her grandchildren play in the living room, watching cartoons on a TV they say is about a year old. I asked the eldest what for him has been the biggest change.
When we lived in the wooden house, everything was a little dirty. Now everything isn't as dirty.
With a new roof over their heads, they say life feels more stable. But this hasn't stopped younger generations from feeling the pull of nearby cities.
Life is still tough for Li Jun because her adult children work in the town nearby, while she alone will take care of their kids, her parents, the house, as well as the crops and animals. So she says it's some relief that local authorities are turning their attention to families like hers.
Everything's different now, like upturned soil, roads, even the house have changed. It wasn't like this before.
Nicole Ng, CGTN, Weisi County, Yunnan.
You're watching Africa Live. Your sports news coming up next. Coming up, Morocco's Al Bakkali returns home to